I was just reading an article entitled "The Science of Vaccines is Settled," but is science ever truly settled?
In 2003 and 2004, the Institute of Medicine, which is supposed to be the arbiter of medical science in our government, made the declaration that this controversy, the issue about whether thimerosal is causing autism, should no longer be studied, that it was settled now. And you know, no scientist ever says that. Every hypothesis is subject to further adjustments and challenge, and that's what science does. It challenges existing hypotheses and says, is this real? Do the facts that we now know today support that hypothesis, or do we need to rethink it? And they declared no more studies should be done. And then the NIH and CDC and all the institutions got in lockstep with that and said, we're going to defund anybody who wants to look at this question. We're going to make sure that they're not funded. And that's what's happened ever since.
If you've ever taken a science class, the first day in science, what they teach you is science is never settled. That you must always keep questioning. We wouldn't have Einsteins. You'd never have, where's the new ideas come from? You wouldn't have scientific breakthroughs. Right, the world would still be flat. The earth would still be the center of the universe. Right. You know, it's the constant question that keeps science advancing. Yeah. And when you hear this statement from almost every politician and every scientist, all the way down to Sanjay Gupta, you know, who we all trust, the science is settled. That's the least scientific statement you could ever make. It's not settled. It can't be settled. That statement is anti-science by definition.
The science is never settled. Because here's the thing. When I grew up, I got 1 or 2 vaccines. And as far as I know, they were fairly safe back then, even though they were probably nowhere near safe. But I grew up in a less toxic world. I grew up in Africa. We ate out of our local vegetable garden. There was no pesticides or herbicides. We ate the stuff as it came. We start adding more and more vaccines, for example, but at the same time we're adding pesticides and herbicides and thousands and tens of thousands of chemicals that are just in our world. And you give that same vaccine today, and it might have a different outcome. And then when you keep adding vaccines, you have to start all over with the research because it's never been tested. MMR in the schedule. Now let's add back in 87 the Hib vaccine, and in 93 the Prevnar, and then we moved the Hep A down and the Hep B down, and we added the rotavirus, and then we added the meningococcal, and we've added Gardasil now for teenagers, and we add. Every time you add, the science is unknown. We haven't even studied it. So we've got to keep our scientific minds open and start looking at what we're actually doing. And unless you look, you don't know. So these parents who have concerns, I applaud you. They're legitimate concerns. And until you can show me the science, you should be skeptical.
But again, instead of taking my word for it, let me introduce you to Bernadine Healy, former head of the National Institute of Health. The National Institute of Health brings in more money than any other agency in our health department. This is what she had to say. Not me, not the huckster Del Bigtree, one of the greatest minds in science, ahead of the greatest scientific body in the world, asked, what about vaccine testing and autism?
This is the time when we do have the opportunity to understand whether or not there are susceptible children, perhaps genetically, perhaps they have a metabolic issue, mitochondrial disorder, immunological issue, that makes them more susceptible to vaccines, plural, or to one particular vaccine, or to a component of vaccine, like mercury. So we now, in these times, have to, I think, take another look at that hypothesis, not deny it. And I think we have the tools today that we didn't have 10 years ago, that we didn't have 20 years ago, to try and tease that out and find out if indeed there is that susceptible group. Why is this important? A susceptible group does not mean that vaccines aren't good. What a susceptible group will tell us is that maybe there is a group of individuals or a group of children that shouldn't have a particular vaccine or shouldn't have vaccine on the same schedule. It is the job of the public health community and of physicians to be out there and to say, yes, we can make it safer because we are able to say this is a subset. We're going to deliver it in a way that we think is safer.
Do you feel the government was too quick to dismiss out of hand that there was this possibility of a link between vaccines and autism?
I think the government or certain public health officials in the government have been too quick to dismiss the concerns of these families without studying the population that got sick. I haven't seen major studies that focus on 300 kids who got autistic symptoms within a period of a few weeks of a vaccine. The reason why they didn't want to look for those susceptibility groups was because they're afraid that if they found them, however big or small they were, that would scare the public away. The fact that there is concern that you don't want to know that susceptible group is a real disappointment to me. If you know that susceptible group, you can save those children.
It sounds like you don't think the hypothesis of the link between vaccines and autism is completely irrational.
So when I first heard about it, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense to me. The more you delve into it, if you look at the basic science, if you look at the research that's been done in animals, if you also look at some of these individual cases, and if you look at the evidence that there is no link, what I come away with is the question has not been answered.
What? Lead scientist, head of the NIH, says, I don't believe the question has been answered. She says, I have never found or seen a study that did something like look at 300 kids that got autism a couple of weeks after a vaccine. You see, we're not lying to you about this. She knows the science isn't being done. They're telling you thousands of studies have debunked the vaccine-autism connection, but the head of the NIH says, I can't find one.
כדי לקשור את האוטיזם לחיסון בחצבת, צריך לעשות עבודה ולהראות שאוטיזם שכיח יותר בין מחוסנים לבין לא מחוסנים. כשזה נבדק, נמצא שאין שום הבדל.
You see, we're not lying to you about this. She knows the science isn't being done. They're telling you thousands of studies have debunked the vaccine-autism connection, but the head of the NIH says, I can't find one that was done the way you would do it, that actually had autistic children in it. They're not doing the science. As a reporter or as a detective, your job is to really essentially find what was the motive. Everyone says, Del, you're saying that all these doctors are lying, that the CDC is lying, our government agencies are lying. Why would they do that? She just told you. The reason we're not doing it is we are so afraid that if we do a study and we find a problem with the vaccine, no matter how small it might be, that people will stop vaccinating. Therefore, it's safer for us to never do a study, to never put at risk showing us that they're actually dangerous. So they are lying. Your entire health departments of the world are literally sticking their heads in the sand. That's how they're doing your science. Let's not look at it because that makes us all safer. Let me show you how this works very quickly. The Institute of Medicine, let's see, is asked every once in a while by the CD. Institute of Medicine is like our Nobel laureates, the best scientists in America that have retired. They're not in government anymore. Every once in a while, the CDC asks them to investigate something. So in 1991, they said, we want you to look into the DTP vaccine. I wonder why. Obviously, all the way back in 1991, they were seeing some of the same problems that we're now knowing are happening in Guinea-Bissau, Africa. People are reporting death. They're reporting injury after the vaccine. There's 22 common conditions being reported happening right after the vaccine. So will you investigate and see if there's any science that says whether or not this could be true? So the Institute of Medicine reads all the science around the world. They use their ability to read, and then they find out what we know. And in this case, they end up reporting that 6 of the 22 conditions can be caused by this vaccine. We read the science that shows it. 4 of them, we've done the science, it exists. You cannot blame the vaccine for that injury. But this number, 12 of the issues you brought of the 22, no science exists anywhere in the world to show us the vaccine does or does not cause it. Things like aseptic meningitis, chronic neurologic damage, learning disabilities, Guillain-Barré syndrome. Terrible, terrible autoimmune diseases, never studied. And they get a little bit upset. They write in a report, if research capacity and accomplishment in this field are not improved, future reviews of vaccine safety will be similarly handicapped. Do they clean up their act? Here's 1994. Now they're looking at DT, MM, Hep B, and Hib. There's 54 common injuries. Enough to look into. Not just we're going to just randomly select problems or make them up. These are reported injuries like we're seeing in bears from the 1%. 12 of the 54 definitely can be caused by the vaccine. The science exists. 4 definitely not. But look at this number. 38 out of 54, we have no idea if demyelinating diseases of the central nervous system are being caused by the vaccines. No science has been done. All the way up to SIDS. No science has been done. The Institute of Medicine is saying this, not me. They're saying the science isn't being done. Again, they get really pissed off. The lack of data is really disturbing. 2011, once again, now we're looking at varicella, tetanus, Hep B, and MMR. 155 common injuries being reported by people after these vaccines. 16 definitely caused, 5 definitely not, but 134 of the 155 common injuries we are not studying. We won't look at it because Bernadine Healy told us it's just too dangerous to look into it. So instead, our doctor is being trained to tell you vaccines don't cause harm.
Listen to Congressman Bill Posey from Florida describe how he believes that every member of Congress should co-sponsor studies to make sure that the vaccines we give our children are safe.
But I think every member of Congress should be a co-sponsor. There's no why does anybody fear requesting a study? I mean, why does anybody fear it? And you know, you go back through this stuff, and some of my friends here who are doctors, you know, I talk about the issue with them, you know, and they say, "Oh, you're nuts." You know, there's been dozens and dozens of studies. And I was like, how many of them have you read? What you know is a big blue-eyed pharmaceutical rep comes in here with your Super Bowl tickets and tells you about these dozens of studies that say this, that are not true.
אחר כך אנחנו עוברים לשלב הראשון, שזו אוכלוסייה מאוד מאוד מצומצמת, צריכה להיות אוכלוסייה מאוד מאוד בריאה, כי בעצם אנחנו מחפשים לראות אם יש תופעות מיידיות ומאוד מאוד קשות.
And by the way, the people that they test them on, Alan, are not typical Americans. They use what they call exclusionary criteria. They are only giving these vaccines in these tests that they're doing to the healthiest people. If you look at their exclusionary criteria, you cannot be pregnant, you cannot be overweight, you must have never smoked a cigarette, you must have never vaped, you must have no respiratory problems in your family, you can't suffer asthma, you can't have diabetes, you can't have rheumatoid arthritis or any autoimmune disease. There has to be no history of seizure in your family. These are the people they're testing the vaccine on. But that's not who they're going to give them to. They're going to go, what happens? These people are like the Avengers. They're like Superman. You can shoot them with a bullet and they won't go down. What happens when they give them to the typical American, you know, Sally Six-Pack and Joe Bag of Donuts, who's 50 pounds overweight and has diabetes? What is going to happen then? You're not going to see 20%. You're going to see a lot of people dropping dead. These people lost consciousness. They had to go to the hospital. They had huge fevers. And they're the healthiest people in the world. So any other medicine, Alan, that had that kind of profile in its original phase 1 study would be DOA. 54% of Americans now has diabetes, overweight, rheumatoid arthritis. are smokers, they have 54% of us, I'm not even talking about smokers and vapors, 54% of us has chronic disease. They're testing it on one group and they're going to give it to another. And we need to know what the risk factor is in the people that they give it to.
הטראומה הזאת, שאתה מזריק אותם לדם, היא מעוררת מחלות רדומות. וכל אחד לפי מה שהוא רגיש. אז אם נגיד במשפחה יש נטייה לאלרגיות, אז אולי תעורר אלרגיה או אסתמה או משהו כזה. אם במשפחה יש נטייה לפתח את המצב האוטיסטי, מה שהיום מכונה קשת ה-PDD, אותם הפרעות תקשורת למיניהם, אז זה מתעורר.